I was lying on my deck, right? The sun was doing that golden hour thing, you know, where it makes your cheap synthetic deck furniture look expensive, and I was just floating. Total peace. The sound? It was a curated playlist I call chillax but totally riff-heavy blues rock. Volume was a solid 4 out of 10. If a butterfly had fluttered by, its wing beats probably would have registered louder. I was being a responsible, middle-aged suburbanite enjoying his property. That's the important context here. Then the shadow fell. "Mr. Harding!" The way Karen says my name, it's not a greeting, it's an indictment. It's like the sound a prosecutor makes when presenting a particularly heinous piece of evidence, like a blood-stained glove, or in this case, my perfectly legal mid-volume guitar solo. I took a slow sip of my seltzer water, the fancy imported stuff, naturally, and looked over my shoulder. There she was. Karen, from 3 doors down, framed perfectly in my peripheral vision, hands on her hips like a poorly cast B-movie villain. She was wearing a visor, even though the sun had dipped too low to require one. It was all about the aesthetic of righteousness. "Afternoon, Karen," I said, maybe a little too cheerfully. "Gorgeous Saturday, isn't it? I was just enjoying some—" "I don't care what you're enjoying," she cut me off. The woman has the conversational finesse of a charging rhino. "I care about the disruptive noise pollution you are spewing all over this cul-de-sac." Disruptive noise pollution. It was the blues. B.B. King, for crying out loud. The man's sound is literally a sigh, given musical form. Disruptive? I paused the music with my phone, holding the remote hostage. "Karen, the neighbor's kid, Timmy, is practicing his saxophone right now. It sounds like a goose fighting a lawnmower. Mine is barely audible." "That is an orchestral instrument being practiced indoors, Mr. Harding. This garbage is amplified, outdoors, and it's projecting right over my gazebo, where I was attempting to hold a perfectly civilized Zoom meeting with my book club." I blinked slowly. "Your book club is on Saturday at 5 p.m.? That's dedication, Karen. What thrilling suburban tragedy are you discussing this week? The proper use of chlorine in the community pool?" That was a mistake. Sarcasm is fuel for her fire. Her face went tight, like she'd just bitten into a lemon slice carved into the shape of my head. "This is not a joke, Leo. You exhibit a stunning level of entitlement. I have a right to the peaceful enjoyment of my property, and your constant musical assault violates that right. It violates the spirit of our community." "Musical assault," I muttered, shaking my head. "It's literally the most gentle music I own. I'm warning you. This is the 3rd time this month. I'm tired of being the only one who cares about the rules." She stepped closer, and that's when she produced the evidence. She didn't just tell me about the rules. She slammed a thick packet of paper onto my railing. It was a printout of the entire HOA noise ordinance, highlighted in 3 different colors. The passive aggression was practically glowing. "This," she hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a highlighted section about amplified sound, "is Section 4.c, Paragraph 2. And I have witnesses." The Wilsons heard it. "Mrs. Peterson is filing a grievance. I am going to call the HOA, the police, and every single person who hates your face, and I will have you fined out of this neighborhood." I looked at the packet. I looked at Karen. I looked at the little green light on my phone, confirming my blues rock was still paused. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't the fine I was worried about. It was the principle. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of having one's perfectly pleasant, mid-volume B.B. King-fueled relaxation declared an act of war. I was done being polite. I was done compromising. I realized the problem wasn't the music. The problem was Karen. And the only way to beat her wasn't to comply with the rules, but to find a way to operate within the rules while simultaneously making her life a glorious, noise-filled misery. She was still ranting, something about property values and the sanctity of the suburban experience. I tuned her out. My mind was already in the laboratory of vengeance. I needed a weapon, a sonic weapon. "You know what, Karen?" I interrupted, picking up the printout. I held it gingerly, like it was radioactive. "You're absolutely right. Amplified sound is a problem. I'm going to have to make a change." She actually looked smug. "Good. I'm glad you've finally seen reason." I smiled, a slow predator's smile. "Oh, I've seen reason. I've just defined it differently than you have. You want disruptive? You're going to get disruptive. Thank you for the inspiration." She looked confused, which was an improvement. She huffed and retreated, probably back to her civilized Zoom book club, confident in her victory. The moment she was gone, I ran inside. I didn't even put the seltzer down. I threw the HOA packet onto the coffee table and opened my laptop. This was a mission of strategic, culturally protected auditory warfare. I needed an acoustic instrument, something that couldn't be regulated by the amplified sound clause, something that had natural, terrifying volume. Tuba? Too expensive. Too heavy. I'd lose a lung just getting it out of the car. Vuvuzela? Too cheap. Too temporary. It would only annoy Karen for a minute. I needed something that implied commitment. Didgeridoo? Intriguing. But I didn't want to get into any cultural appropriation arguments. I was fighting Karen, not history. Then, there it was. Google knew what I was looking for. The algorithm, in its infinite wisdom, displayed the perfect image. A handsome, determined-looking Scotsman, tartan flying, blasting out a sound that felt like it could strip paint. Bagpipes. The perfection was instantaneous and breathtaking. Bagpipes aren't just loud. They are culturally loud. They are the sound of celebration, mourning, and absolutely unforgiving volume. Try to tell an HOA president that a guy practicing his traditional Scottish music is violating a noise ordinance. Good luck. It's acoustic, it's traditional, and it sounds like a dying moose in a wind tunnel. I went straight to eBay. Forget a practice chanter. I went straight for the full package. Used, slightly worn, probably smelled a bit like old wool and regret. Perfect. Title: Great Highland Bagpipes, full set, used, needs tuning and will annoy your neighbors. Okay, the last part was in my head. The price was acceptable. The shipping time, 3 days. I hit buy it now with the conviction of a man about to change his life for the stupidest, most magnificent reason possible. I slumped back in my chair, staring at the HOA printout. I picked up the paper and flipped it over. On the back, I started drafting my new schedule. Leo Harding's Schedule of Vengeance Time, activity goal, 5:00 a.m. Wake up, coffee, deep lung exercises. Preparation, 6:30 a.m. bagpipe practice commences. Sunrise is 6:45 a.m. I'm being generous. Phase 1, ear canal penetration. 7:30 a.m. bagpipe practice concludes. Legal compliance, before 8 a.m. construction rule. 7:31 a.m. enjoy a peaceful, satisfied breakfast. Victory. I imagined Karen waking up to the sound. I imagined her throwing her window open, ready to scream about amplified sound, only to be confronted with a man in a t-shirt huffing and puffing into a wind instrument that has been socially acceptable since the 16th century. She wants disruptive? My inner monologue whispered, a maniacal glee spreading across my face. I'll give her a disruption that sounds like 100 cats fighting inside a washing machine, all while being completely and utterly legal. "Welcome to the show, Karen," I murmured to the empty room. "The show starts promptly at 6:30 a.m., and admission is free to everyone in the surrounding 3-block radius." I spent the remaining word count of this section reading Wikipedia articles about the history of the bagpipes, trying to find obscure legal precedents that protected my soon-to-be hobby. Turns out, there are surprisingly few laws specifically targeting bagpipes. Most ordinances use terms like loud, unnecessary, or unusual noises, but then they get specific. Power tools, loud stereos, barking dogs. The bagpipes are simply a void in the legal system, a glorious, screaming loophole. I felt a beautiful, terrible sense of purpose. The 3-day wait for the instrument felt like 3 years. I signed up for online bagpipe lessons and watched YouTube tutorials, attempting to air-gate the movements. I looked like an absolute fool, but I was a fool with a plan. A very, very loud plan. The silence of my suburban home felt temporary, a calm before the sonic storm. The package arrived 3 days later. It wasn't the imposing, majestic instrument I'd seen in the photos. It was a bulky, slightly depressing cardboard box containing what looked like a collection of wooden plumbing pieces and a deflated leather sack. It smelled faintly of mothballs and old whiskey. The moment I tried to assemble it, I understood the true scope of my commitment. It wasn't just a matter of blowing air. It was a coordination challenge that required the physical stamina of a marathon runner and the manual dexterity of a surgeon. My first attempt at a sound was not the clarion call of the Scottish Highlands. It was a dying, choked squeak, like a mouse being slowly vacuumed into a dustbuster. I tried again. P-H-T-T-T-T. Worse. It was agonizing. The chanter reed, the tiny, crucial piece that makes the sound, was fighting me every step of the way. I called the number for the online instructor I'd booked. His name was Hamish McTavish. His voice was a dry, gravelly monotone that sounded like he had personally witnessed the entire history of Scotland and was disappointed by it. "You've purchased the pipes, aye?" Hamish asked. "Yes, Hamish. They're here. They sound like a dying pigeon." "Good," he grunted. "That means ye have air. Now ye must tame the beast. The chanter is sorrow. The drone is the eternal wail of the hills. Ye must connect with the sorrow." "I'm connecting with the sorrow of my lungs exploding, Hamish." "Wind is the better fuel, lad," he repeated, entirely ignoring my sarcasm. "For the next 2 weeks, you'll only use the practice chanter, indoors, until you can play Scotland the Brave without sounding like a goat choking on a thistle." The practice chanter was slightly better, but still required incredible fingerwork and breath control. I looked like I was passionately kissing a clarinet mouthpiece that hated me. I spent hours practicing in my garage, sweating, swearing, and occasionally accidentally producing a note that pierced my eardrums. My motive shifted from 100% spite to about 70% spite, and 30% sheer, bloody-minded refusal to be beaten by a musical bag. The core problem remained. Where to practice at 6:30 a.m.? My garage would still leak sound, and just standing on the driveway felt too vulnerable. I needed a designated performance space, a strategic fortification, a practice pavilion. The idea was to build a simple, open-sided gazebo on the far corner of my property, closest to Karen's master bedroom window. Not to dampen the sound, mind you, but to focus it. And, crucially, to establish a legally ambiguous structure that implied permanence and dedication to my artistic pursuit. I put out a call for quotes. I needed quick, cheap, and unquestioning. What I got were 3 flavors of absurd. Contractor 1. Big Mike, the overpricer. Big Mike showed up in a pristine white pickup the size of a tank. He wore a crisp polo shirt and smelled of expensive cologne and fear of being underbid. "So, Mr. Harding," Big Mike boomed, looking less at the yard and more at my shoes. "Acoustics studio, you say? For Scottish traditional music?" "That's right, Mike. Just a simple, open-air pavilion. A place to play without the distraction of the elements." "Ah, I see. Elements. Well, a proper structure for such a demanding art requires acoustic integrity. We'd be talking sound-dampening panels, parabolic reflectors to manage the projection, maybe an imported slate roof for optimal resonance. I could frame it in a beautiful cedar with a custom tongue and groove floor. This is a bespoke operation, Leo. We're looking at a starting quote of $58,500. That includes the bespoke foundation and a 2-year sound guarantee." I choked on air. "Mike, I need a gazebo. Not a recording studio for a Scottish rock band. I'm playing 3 songs at sunrise to annoy a woman named Karen. 58 grand? Mike shrugged, pulling out a huge leather-bound notepad. "Art is costly, Leo. Noise complaints are costlier. My price includes the peace of mind that you'll be acoustically isolated. Think of it as a defensive structure against the HOA. "I'm trying to offend the HOA, Mike. I need a place to project the sound, not absorb it. Thanks for your time." He left, looking genuinely disappointed that I didn't want to mortgage my house for a wooden bucket to yell into. Contractor 2. Chet, the flaky budget guy. Chet showed up 30 minutes late, riding a bicycle that looked like it was held together with duct tape and hope. He wore overalls stained with what I suspect was every paint color ever invented, and he smelled faintly of turpentine and expired coffee. "Leo, man, love the vision. A vibe. A structure of sound." Chet was practically vibrating with chaotic energy. "Chet, it's a gazebo. Simple. Wood. Roof. On that corner, pointed west. West, got it. Optimal annoyance vector. Look, I can do this cheap, real cheap. I got some reclaimed lumber from a disassembled barn upstate. Real rustic, real noisy. $5,800, cash only. I can start tomorrow. I just need a 6-pack of that seltzer you're drinking, and I'll draw up the plans right now." He whipped a crumpled napkin out of his pocket and started scribbling furiously with a marker. "Chet, those look like they might violate every local building code in existence." "Codes are guidelines, man. This is more of a suggestion of a structure. It's a performance platform. It's art. Can you get me a deposit right now? I need to go buy a new hacksaw blade. Mine's currently lodged in a tree." The dialogue with Chet was a dizzying, non-linear experience. He kept referring to the roof as the cosmic sound funnel and insisted on paying his 2 assistants, Sparky and the Maestro, in pizza and energy drinks. The entire interaction felt unstable. I politely declined, worried that if I hired Chet, I would end up with a tilted, half-painted structure and a lifetime supply of structural anxiety. Contractor 3. Maria, the pragmatist. Maria arrived exactly on time, driving a sensible, clean work van. She was all business, wearing a hard hat and a professional demeanor that cut through the absurdity like a laser. "Mr. Harding," she said, clipboard in hand. "The request is for a standard 8x8 open-sided garden gazebo, specifically to be placed at the boundary facing your neighbor's property. May I ask the specific purpose?" I sighed, recognizing that honesty was the only way forward. "Maria, I am learning the bagpipes. They are very loud. My neighbor Karen objects to the sound. I am building this gazebo to practice at 6:30 a.m. in a highly visible designated spot, so I can claim I am engaged in a dedicated cultural pursuit and not just being a nuisance." Maria paused, looking from me to the corner of the yard, then to Karen's house. She lowered her voice. "Ah, an auditory declaration of war. That's outside my normal scope, but I appreciate the strategy." "So, what's the damage?" "A standard, code-compliant, prefab kit installation with a nice, structurally sound deck base. We'll anchor it properly. I can have it up in 2 days. Total cost, $4,500. I advise you to paint it a historically appropriate color, like forest green, to enhance the cultural pursuit claim. And yes," she added, a tiny smile playing on her lips, "we will aim it west. It will be legally sound, but structurally weak enough that you can't argue it's a permanent dwelling. Perfect for short, sharp bursts of sound." Maria was the one. She saw the vision, respected the pettiness, and provided a code-compliant solution. I handed her the deposit immediately. The construction of the practice pavilion was a minor spectacle. It went up fast, exactly as Maria promised. It was a simple, elegant little gazebo, completely open on 3 sides, with the 4th wall, the one facing Karen, cleverly reinforced to serve as a backboard for sound projection. Karen, naturally, was watching. She was standing on her deck, sipping an iced tea, and conducting her own internal investigation. She saw Maria and marched over. I watched from my living room window as the confrontation unfolded. "Excuse me," Karen called to Maria, voice dripping with forced sweetness. "I am Mrs. Dubois. I live next door. What exactly is this structure being used for?" Maria stopped tightening a bolt and straightened up. Her professionalism was impeccable. "Afternoon, ma'am. This is a commissioned open-air garden structure per the specifications of the property owner, Mr. Harding." "Yes, but what is it?" Karen insisted, her voice getting sharper. "Is it a shed? A garage? A potential extension?" "It is classified as an accessory garden structure under Local Code R12, ma'am. It meets all setback requirements and does not require a secondary permit, as it is under 100 square feet." "And what is the purpose? I am concerned about noise. Is this sound dampened?" Karen edged closer, dropping her voice. "Look, I will pay you. Right now. An extra $500 if you tell me what he plans to use it for, and if you can subtly point it away from my bedroom." Maria didn't even flinch. She just stared blankly. "Ma'am, my contract is with Mr. Harding. My work is done according to the approved plans, which specify a Western orientation. All materials used are standard lumber. If you have concerns about the use of the structure, I suggest you speak with the property owner directly. Have a nice day." Karen was defeated by pure, unadulterated professionalism. She retreated, her visor practically steaming with frustration. I knew I couldn't wait until Hamish declared me ready. I needed a test run, a psychological blow. That evening, far from sunrise time, I hauled the pipes, the full, actual, majestic, awful pipes, to the gazebo. I took a deep breath, puffed up the bag, and launched into a truly pathetic attempt at a scale. Where blort. It was awful, but it was loud. The sound carried perfectly across the neighborhood, an absolute train wreck of noise. I managed maybe 30 seconds before I collapsed, dizzy and winded. The retaliation was immediate. Not a scream, but a thud, an email. I checked my phone. It was an email, CC'd to the entire block. Subject line, urgent, concerns regarding unspecified, new, highly disruptive noise pollution risks. The body of the email was a masterpiece of passive aggression, mentioning the alarming, screeching sounds emanating from the newly constructed structure, and suggesting everyone be proactive in contacting the HOA. The war was officially on. I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. I had a gazebo, a set of pipes, and a fully enraged Karen. Time to get serious about my 6:30 a.m. practice. Only 12 more hours until Phase 1, ear canal penetration. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I felt like a Navy SEAL on a critical mission, except the mission objective was to inflict maximum auditory pain using an antique bellows. I put on a faded "I survived a Scottish wedding" t-shirt, fueled up with coffee, and headed for the practice pavilion. The air was still, quiet, and slightly damp. The neighborhood was asleep. This was the sanctity Karen cherished. This was about to become the soundtrack to her despair. I positioned myself in the gazebo. Hamish's grim instruction echoed in my head. Hold the bag like you would hold the fate of the Scottish nation. Firm, unwavering, and fill it until ye can fill it no more. The clock on my phone ticked to 5:58 a.m. I decided to go early. Technically, the city's construction and yard work ban lifted at 7 o'clock a.m., and the HOA's loud nuisance clause cited 8 o'clock a.m. But I wanted to test the waters. This was cultural sound, after all. I took a breath that felt like it sucked the air out of the surrounding 4 houses, pressed the bag against my ribs, and forced the air through the chanter and the drones. The result was truly magnificent in its horror. I wasn't playing a melody. I was playing a sustained note, a long, piercing, discordant wah that sliced through the pre-dawn quiet like a chainsaw through silk. The sheer volume was staggering. It felt less like sound and more like a physical pressure against my inner ear. I immediately launched into Amazing Grace, which I knew only 3 notes of, so it sounded like Amazing Grace was having a stroke. Wah blort, wah. My internal monologue was sheer, joyful adrenaline. Take that, Karen. Feel the majesty of my spite. This is B.B. King, acoustic style, you fiend. The neighborhood's reaction was immediate and orchestral. Karen's window. Her master bedroom window, directly facing my gazebo, slammed open so hard I heard the sash rattle. The scream. A high-pitched, unintelligible shriek pierced the air. It was a cry of pure, unadulterated, noise-induced panic. The dogs. 3 houses down, a beagle pack woke up and began a frantic, synchronized chorus of barking. The alarms. My neighbor's antique BMW, which apparently had a hypersensitive alarm system, went off in a frantic, pulsating rhythm, blending perfectly with my off-key drones. The projectile. I saw a blur of terracotta and soil sail through the air and land with a sad, wet thud exactly 3 feet from the gazebo's base. It was a potted plant, a declaration of war in shrubbery form. I kept playing, eyes shut against the chaos, feeling the immense, tiring pressure of the bag. I played until my lungs screamed, culminating in a final defiant partie of air exhaustion. The resulting silence was deafening. I checked my watch. 6:05 a.m. I had inflicted 7 minutes of glorious, organized chaos. I was disassembling the pipes, wiping the moisture from the drone reeds, when I saw the flashing blue and red lights. 2 police cruisers, rolling slowly and dramatically down the cul-de-sac. This was the moment of truth. I calmly waited by my gazebo, looking for all the world like a serious musician taking a break from an intense practice session. 2 officers approached. Officer Davis, a massive man with a weary look that suggested he'd been dealing with HOA disputes since the Clinton administration, and Officer Chen, who looked barely out of the academy, clutching a coffee cup like it was a life raft. Officer Davis stopped about 10 feet from me, staring at the bagpipes in my hand like they might explode. "Mr. Harding?" Davis asked, his voice a low rumble. "That's me, officer. Leo Harding. Can I help you?" We received multiple 911 calls and one very, very angry, detailed email regarding high-pitched, sustained wailing and screaming originating from this address. Officer Chen was just staring at the bagpipes. What is that, sir?" "These, Officer Chen, are Great Highland bagpipes. They are a traditional, cultural, Scottish musical instrument," I explained, giving them a slight, respectful tilt. "And I was engaged in the constitutionally protected practice of said instrument on my own private property." Davis pulled out his citation pad, looking deeply skeptical. "Sir, the time is 6:15 a.m. We have a standing ordinance regarding excessive noise before 7 a.m., and specifically an 8 a.m. cutoff for construction and loud yard work in this municipality." "I'm familiar with that ordinance, Officer Davis," I said, nodding toward Karen's house, where a curtain was twitching violently. In fact, Mrs. Dubois was kind enough to provide me with a full copy, which I reviewed meticulously. I retrieved the HOA packet from the gazebo shelf. The ordinance cites loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noise, specifically defining unnecessary noise as amplified music, use of power tools, and excessive dog barking. I ask you, officer, is this amplified? I held up the pipes. Davis grunted. "No, it appears to be analog." "Check. Is this a power tool?" "No." "Is this dog barking?" Chen stifled a giggle, and Davis shot him a look. "No, sir, though it is of comparable volume to the dogs in the immediate vicinity." "Exactly, officer. The ordinance is silent on acoustic, traditional, cultural musical instruments. The closest parallel is the construction noise clause, which is specifically for things like hammers and saws, and that only applies before 7 a.m. But even if you try to stretch that definition, I am engaged in a cultural pursuit, not a construction project. I am playing a wind instrument. It is my hobby." Davis rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking at the printout I handed him. He flipped through the highlighted sections, his eyes scanning the legalese. He looked absolutely defeated. Karen, unable to stand the tension, stomped across her lawn, barefoot, still in her pajamas. "Officers, what is the problem? Issue the citation. He's disrupting the peace. It sounds like a banshee giving birth to a concrete mixer." Davis held up a hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Ma'am, please stand back. We are reviewing the city ordinance." He looked back at me. "Mr. Harding, let me be clear. I personally think this is an absolutely ridiculous and aggressive act of neighbor-on-neighbor provocation." "I understand that, officer. But is it a crime?" I countered, keeping my voice polite but firm. He sighed, a truly monumental, existential sigh. He looked at the ordinance again, then at the ridiculous gazebo, then at Karen, who was trembling with indignation. "No, Mr. Harding, it is not. The ordinance is very specific regarding amplification and type of noise. An acoustic wind instrument, particularly one of historical cultural significance, is not explicitly covered by the unnecessary noise statute, provided it ceases operation before the municipal working hour starts to count, which is 7 a.m. here in this zone. You stopped at 6:05 a.m. Karen sputtered. "But the volume, it's unbearable." Davis turned to her. "Ma'am, the volume is not the legal criteria, the source is. Unless the city council has a specific ordinance against bagpiping at dawn, which they do not, there is no violation. It appears Mr. Harding has found a loophole. Officer Chen piped up, his curiosity overriding his caution. Did you say it was Scottish, sir? Very much so, officer. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Right. Cultural. So if we cited him, we could potentially face a legal challenge based on protecting cultural expression? I saw a court case about a German Oompa band once. Davis cut him off. We're not facing a legal challenge, Chen, because we're not citing him. Mr. Harding, your actions, while incredibly hostile to community relations, are currently within the law. We advise you to try and be a better neighbor. I'm trying to be a better Highlander, officer, I replied, giving him a sincere, small nod. I'll keep it to daylight hours. Karen let out an explosion of pure, impotent rage. This is ridiculous! I pay my taxes! I am being persecuted by a tartan-clad hooligan! I demand an appeal! I demand a different officer! Davis just shook his head, looking more tired than ever. Ma'am, we've reviewed the code. There is nothing we can do. This is now a civil dispute. As they drove away, Karen glared at me, her face a mask of thwarted vengeance. She had played her hand, she had called the law, and the law had shrugged, citing the lack of a bagpipe clause. The victory was complete, glorious, and absolutely maddening for her. My inner monologue was doing a jig. I was legal, I was protected, I was the harbinger of a new, loud, and entirely unexpected dawn. I picked up the potted plant debris. It was a dying geranium. Even the plants had turned against her. I would practice again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. I had 3,000 words of legal victory, and the real war was just beginning. The police visit solidified two things. One, I was legally untouchable by the current ordinances, and two, Karen was never going to give up. The Battle of the Bagpipes transitioned from a skirmish to a grinding, entrenched, ridiculously petty neighborhood war. My 6:30 a.m. practice runs became a fixture. I was getting better. Not good, but definitely hitting more notes and sustaining the drone longer. The initial dying pigeon sound was maturing into a robust, albeit often off-key, angry swarm of bees. Karen's counterattacks were swift and spectacularly passive-aggressive. 1. The lights. The day after the police visit, I walked out to the gazebo at 6:25 a.m. and was nearly blinded. Karen had installed 3 massive construction-grade floodlights aimed directly at my gazebo. They were so bright, they made the pre-dawn darkness look like noon. My move? I bought a cheap pair of welding goggles. I practiced in them for a week. They made me look like an absolute maniac, but they perfectly blocked the lights. Karen eventually turned them off, realizing I looked more menacing in the goggles. 2. The auditory barrage. On day 4, as I began my first piece, the marginally improved Scotland the Brave, Karen unveiled her sonic weapon, talk radio. Specifically, the highly explicit, highly political, highly annoying Howard Stern show, blasted through her own deck speakers, at a respectable, non-violating volume of 4.5 out of 10. The resulting sound was an auditory nightmare, the piercing drone of the bagpipes overlaid with the muffled sounds of shock-jock banter, crude jokes, and commercial jingles. It was truly awful, but it was her noise, and she was technically not violating any rules about volume. My move? I didn't stop. I simply played louder and focused on the rhythms Hamish had taught me. I figured her mind would break before mine. After 5 days of trying to listen to raunchy celebrity gossip filtered through the skirl of a great Highland bagpipe, Karen's counterattack ceased. She couldn't listen to her own weapon. 3. The gnome display. The pettiest attack came in the form of lawn ornaments. Karen had a tasteful, minimalist garden. Then, suddenly, she acquired 53 brightly colored, hideous garden gnomes. She lined them up on her property line, facing my gazebo. Each gnome had a tiny, handwritten, laminated sign around its neck. Signs like, "I demand silence. Go back to your homeland, noise machine." And my personal favorite, "HOA hates you." It was a highly dramatic and likely HOA-violating garden gnome protest. My move? I bought a single, dignified statue of William Wallace, Mel Gibson version, naturally, and placed it directly inside the gazebo, facing the gnomes of judgment. I felt like I was practicing for a very silly war. Amidst all this absurdity, Hamish, my instructor, was strangely delighted by the conflict. I'd sent him videos, taken before 6:30 a.m., of course, of me practicing with the floodlights on, the gnomes staring, and the distant sound of Howard Stern. "Ah, Leo," Hamish said over Zoom, his face etched with grudging respect. "Ye are fueled by the righteous anger. That is good. Now, turn that anger into a proper C-note. This piece I'm giving ye, The Drunken Piper, it requires precision. Play it for the honor of the clan, not the spite of the neighbor, but mostly the spite." Leo's dedication grew. What started as a joke was now a challenge. I wasn't just trying to make noise, I was trying to master the instrument so that the noise I made was artistically superior to Karen's retaliation. The neighborhood dynamic had completely shifted. Everyone had to take a side in the bagpipe war. Some, like the elderly Mr. Henderson, whose sleep cycle was already in question, were firmly on Karen's side. They wouldn't speak to me, only offer tight-lipped nods of disapproval. But a surprising number of people were on Team Bagpipe, not because they liked the sound, but because they hated Karen's constant, high-handed interference in their lives. I started finding gifts left in my mailbox. A coffee thermos labeled "Fuel for Freedom." A muffin basket with a note, "Keep fighting the good fight, the guy who hates the gnome army." And the greatest gift of all, a custom t-shirt someone slid under my door. It was green, featuring a stick figure playing bagpipes, with the phrase, "Practice like a Highlander." I wore it every morning. The tipping point came with the emergency HOA meeting. Karen, having failed with the police, decided to go nuclear and force a change in the bylaws. I walked into the clubhouse meeting room, wearing my "Practice like a Highlander" shirt under a light jacket. The room was packed. Karen was seated at the main table, flanked by her two loyal, miserable-looking allies. The HOA president, a nervous man named Gary, rapped his gavel. "Welcome, everyone. We have only one item on the agenda tonight: the proposed Acoustic Noise Bylaw Amendment, otherwise known as the Bagpipe Clause." Karen stood up, clutching a binder thicker than a medieval Bible. "Thank you, Gary. Neighbors, for weeks now, we have suffered an unholy assault on our peace. Mr. Harding here has weaponized a cultural instrument to inflict psychological damage on his neighbors. He is using a loophole. This proposed amendment simply closes that loophole. It defines acoustic instruments played outdoors between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. as a nuisance if the sound level exceeds the established decibel limit for a vacuum cleaner. The discussion started. It was pure chaos, a beautiful mess of community frustration. I don't care about the bagpipes, Karen. I care that you called animal control on my poodle for excessive barking when she saw a squirrel, shouted a woman from the back. The bagpipes are terrible, but I can't in good conscience vote to ban acoustic music, said another. What if my son wants to practice his cello on the porch? This is a slippery slope. Today the bagpipes, tomorrow the community drum circle. We must act now, Karen yelled back. I waited until the noise died down, then raised my hand. Gary, looking like he was about to cry, pointed at me. Leo? Thank you, Gary. I just want to clarify my position. I am deeply sorry that my pursuit of this beautiful traditional art form has caused distress. However, I want to point out the legal danger of this amendment. If you pass this, you are explicitly targeting a specific category of musical instrument. My lawyer, who by the way loves bagpipes, assures me this is a textbook case of cultural protectionism violation and selective enforcement. We are talking about a court battle, the HOA paying my legal fees, and the possibility of national news coverage about a suburban community attempting to ban Scottish culture. I paused for effect. I had no lawyer, but the phrase cultural protectionism violation was gold. Furthermore, I continued, adopting a dramatic, wounded tone, the very fact that I am now good enough that people are attending my early morning practices suggests that this is, in fact, becoming a community feature, not a bug. Look, I gestured to my shirt. I have fans. They bring me muffins. If you ban this, you're banning the muffins of righteousness. The room erupted. The HOA president, sweating profusely, looked between the furious Karen and the potentially lawsuit-happy, muffin-receiving, Scottish culture-defending me. He finally slammed the gavel. We need to table this. The legal ramifications are too high. We will form a subcommittee on acoustic cultural arts. The bagpipe clause is rejected. Karen's face was frozen in a silent scream. She gathered her binder and stormed out. Victory was mine. 2,000 words of glorious, messy, bureaucratic triumph. The bagpipes were safe. The neighborhood war would continue, but I had won the legal high ground. Weeks bled into months. I had moved past amazing grace and was now tackling a genuine pibroch, a complex, epic piece of pipe music. Hamish had been pushing me, and honestly, the spite had long since been replaced by a fierce, if baffling, commitment to the instrument. Ye have the lungs of a blacksmith, Leo, Hamish had grunted in our last session. But the heart of a squirrel. Find the sadness in the song. Put the fury of your petty neighborhood dispute into the chanter. That is the true spirit of the pipes. I was scheduled to play a small, private recital for Hamish via video call later that afternoon. I decided to use my 6:30 a.m. practice as the final dress rehearsal. I hauled the pipes out, wearing my Highlander shirt. The dawn was beautiful. I stood in the gazebo, floodlights off. Karen had surrendered them. No talk radio blaring, just me, the pipes, and the quiet suburban world. I took a deep breath, filled the bag, and began. This time it wasn't noise. It was music. It was loud, yes, a full, unapologetic wall of sound. But the drones were stable. The melody was clear, and I hit every note of the complex march Hamish had taught me. I was channeling the fury, the pettiness, the humor, and the sheer ridiculousness of the entire situation into the piece. It was defiant, loud, and, I have to admit, good. I finished the piece with a flourish, the last note fading into a sustained, perfect drone, and then a final, perfectly controlled thwoop of silence as I let the last of the air out. I stood there, lungs burning, head dizzy with exertion, waiting. I waited for the eruption, for the scream, for the car alarm, for Karen to run out onto her lawn with a baseball bat. Instead, there was silence. Absolute, profound, unsettling silence. I slowly lowered the pipes, the leather bag deflating with a gentle sigh. I looked at Karen's house. Her lights were on, her master bedroom window was open. And then Karen walked out onto her front lawn. She wasn't wearing pajamas. She was wearing a sensible bathrobe. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She was holding a mug of coffee. She looked not furious, but profoundly, utterly tired. Defeated by a months-long campaign of relentless, culturally protected sound. She walked a few steps onto the grass, stopped, and just looked at me. I held my breath, waiting for the final, desperate charge. She took a slow sip of coffee. "It's better," she said, her voice low and raspy, a sound of absolute surrender. I was stunned. "The bagpipes? Thanks. I've been practicing." I kept my guard up, waiting for the trap, the trick, the final poisoned gnome. She shook her head slowly. "No. I mean, yes, it's better. The first week sounded like a garbage disposal eating glass, but I mean the silence afterward." She looked up at the sky, which was now turning a brilliant orange and pink. "It used to be just noise," she continued, speaking less to me and more to the sunrise. "Just an awful, jarring sound that came from nowhere and went nowhere. It was a racket. Now, it actually stops. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the silence after a performance, even that performance, is profound." I just stared. She was analyzing my music. She was offering a legitimate critique. "I'm moving the bedroom to the back of the house," she announced, taking another sip. "I surrender the lawn, Leo. You win. It's a wash. I can't fight a man who is willing to commit to a 5,000-year-old, culturally significant sound to win a petty argument." She looked directly at me. Her eyes, for once, didn't hold fury, just exhaustion. "Just keep it to 2 pieces before 7:30 a.m. My book club is now meeting in person, and I need to be lucid by 8. Do we have a deal, Highlander?" I finally smiled, a genuine, non-sarcastic smile. I had not only won the war, but I had also forced my nemesis to respect the technical merits of my sonic revenge. I had achieved peak pettiness and accidentally stumbled upon a hobby. "Deal, Karen," I said, resting the bagpipes on my knee. 2 pieces, but they have to be technically challenging. For the honor of the clan." "Just keep the drone steady," she grumbled. She turned and walked back into her house, pulling the robe tighter. The war was over. The suburb eventually adjusted. My 6:30 a.m. practices became a feature, not a bug. They were the unofficial start to the day. The sound of the bagpipes, no longer discordant noise but actual music, now accompanied the scent of coffee and the low thrum of the morning commute. Karen and I achieved a bizarre state of détente. We never exchanged pleasantries, but we had a mutual understanding. A truce, bought with the price of my lungs and her sleep schedule. I occasionally saw her giving a tiny, almost imperceptible nod from her new kitchen window. My final thought, as I packed up my beautiful, ridiculous instrument that morning, was one of satisfied reflection. Sometimes, the best way to solve a petty neighborhood problem isn't to back down or compromise. It's to commit to a higher level of absurdity, find a glorious legal loophole, and become a bigger, more magnificent problem. I mused about the future as I sipped my coffee. Maybe I could add a second instrument for tonal contrast, something brassy, something that implied a different kind of cultural expression. Karen said my outdoor speakers were disruptive, So I learned the bagpipes and started practicing at sunrise. Then I decided to add the French horn for texture. Welcome to the show, Volume 2. Just in case.